Welcome to Bethany Community Gardens 2021 Gardening Class Series. Tonight's class is entitled Pollinators in the Landscape. Bethany Community Gardens is about building community through gardening. We are entering our fourth season. Each year, we like to start the year with a gardening class series aimed at new and experienced gardeners who garden in their backyards and at community gardens. No matter where you garden, we believe that gardening not only feeds the body, but builds community and community cohesiveness. Bethany Community Gardens is located at 4702 Southeast Street, which is located at the southwest section of the intersection of 465 and US 31 on the south side of Indianapolis. In 2020, we had a fantastic year, producing and giving away 2.5 tons of produce to 2 food pantries and our garden volunteers. New volunteers are welcome. We work every Tuesday evening from late April to mid-October. Tuesday evening anytime between 5 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. Your next opportunity to join us is on Tuesday after Mother's Day, May 11th. We'll be planting warm season crops. This is a great way to gain hands-on gardening experience. All new volunteers are welcome. Just stop in anytime after 5 p.m. and look for the sign-in table. Bethany Community Gardens will continue to follow COVID-19 safety guidelines. We'll continue wearing masks and cleaning tools between use. Today is our fourth and final class of the season, but the learning will continue in the garden with hands-on training at Bethany Community Gardens. Feel free to join us. We also hope to start having community meals and events starting later in the summer. You can follow us on our Facebook page for up-to-date information. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will monitor. Our plan is to stop at intervals and we'll get caught up on the questions. We're very excited to partner with a professional gardening educator. I'd like to introduce Jo Ellen Myers-Sharp. She is the Hoosier Gardener. She's a 25-year award-winning veteran of print journalism and owns Write For You, LLC, a freelance writing and editing business. You can find her blog at HoosierGardener.com. Jo Ellen is president of GardenCom, Garden Communicators International. She's an Indiana Advanced Master Gardener. She also co-teaches the City Gardener Program with the Purdue Extension Marion County Horticulture Extension Educator. She's also a garden coach and has an all-season container planting business. Additionally, for nearly 20 years, she's worked at a large independent garden center in Indianapolis, including a stint as buyer of perennials, trees, and shrubs. I know you're really going to enjoy this program. If you have questions, please put them in chat. Now I'll turn it over to Jo Ellen.
Good evening, everybody. It's so glad to see everyone this evening. It's kind of an overcast day, and you know, it's good to be inside. I'm toying with the idea of whether I should have a fire in the fireplace today. So there we go. So tonight we're going to talk about pollinators in the garden. And some of these pollinators are probably not things that you necessarily ever thought about. You know, we know about bees and butterflies, but there are beetles, there are flies and other kinds of insects that actually, and birds that pollinate plants. And the reasons for pollinating are many. So first up, we have pollinators in the garden. Here we have a swallowtail butterfly and a bee. Here we have a yellow and black mud dauber on the left and a blue mud dauber on the right. And those are wasps. They also pollinate plants. This is one of my favorite ones to show people. So this is the native ginger, which is called Canadian ginger, but it's North America. So on the left, you see the flowers are kind of, you know, boldly heart-shaped and sort of rounded. And the flower is on the right, and it's right down next to the ground. And what do you think pollinates that flower? It's a beetle, which is something that was just kind of fun to learn about. And so we don't really always know where the pollinators are coming from and which critter it's going to be. Sorry about that. Let's see. So one of the ways to encourage pollinators in our garden is to reduce and eliminate pesticides. you know, if there are no bugs, there are no birds, you know, to eat the bugs. And if there are no bugs, then pollination could be down. You know, you might not have good fruit or production or vegetable production. Let's see. The other thing is to not be a neatnik, because a lot of our native pollinators, a lot of our native bees especially, you know, they hang out in the wintertime in the stems of plants, you know, in leaf litter on the ground. And I know it's a sort of a tug and a pull on whether we should clean up the garden in fall or wait until spring. And, you know, because we've got sort of, some of us are mindful of the fact that we have these native insects around. And so it is sort of a personal thing to decide, but if you can leave a few things standing, that's not going to hurt anything. And so one of the reasons that we need pollinators is for food, all kinds of food, food that we really depend on, some that we really like. And we also depend on pollinators for flowers, because, you know, they take pollen from one plant and move it to another plant. And then the flowers are also food for pollinators, and the plants are food for pollinators. So we kind of have to, again, set our mind's eye for what we're looking for. If we're really wanting to encourage pollinators in our garden, they're not just the pretty ones. All those stripes on this swallowtail caterpillar is nice. But I mean, you know, people like them when they look like butterflies, but when they look like caterpillars, they're less enthused. Here we have a dill and a swallowtail caterpillar, a fennel and a swallowtail caterpillar, parsley and a swallowtail caterpillar. We have a tomato hornworm with parasitic wasps, and a parasitic wasp lays its eggs on the tomato hornworm. The eggs hatch and they go into the caterpillar, and basically they eat it from the inside out. But a tomato hornworm turns into this moth. So what are we going to do? Are we going to, you know, kill that guy? Are we going to let it live? What are we going to do? So my advice is, if you see it with what looks like little egg pellets or rice pellets on the back of the insect, to leave it alone, because it's going to be dead sooner rather than later. Definitely you don't want to kill it when it's in that stage. What you do when it's eating your tomatoes is sort of up to you. I mean, sometimes I pick them off and I have a tray feeder for the birds, and sometimes I put them there, and, you know, sometimes I throw them on the driveway and hoping Mother Nature, in the form of birds or whatever, eats them. Pollinators are also food for birds. You can kind of see the antennas of coming out of the bird's mouth here. So what do we do if we want to encourage pollinators in our garden? If you were going to do just one thing, you didn't want to feed the birds, you didn't want to do anything like that, provide water and they will come. And, you know, I mean, it's just all kinds of animals will come and drink out of your bird bath. And it's really a lovely thing to see. Even in the wintertime, it's good to provide bird baths in the wintertime. I have 2 heated ones. And, you know, believe it or not, the birds take baths in them. You know, it's only like, you know, 0 degrees, but that doesn't seem to bother them. Also, you might find other critters at the bird baths. And so, and mud puddling is another way to create a habitat for butterflies in particular. They like to visit mud puddles so they can take up the nutrients that are in there, like the minerals and things like that. Here we have a water source for bees. These, you can see little black things floating around on the corks, and those are bees. It was just, you know, I had an incident where I had a glass bird feeder, and it was fairly deep. And one spring I went out and looked at the not the bird feeder, but the bird bath. I looked at the bird bath, and there were about 10 bees in there, and these were mason bees, which is a native bee. It's a pollinator bee, and it was because, you know, the glass was too slick, and there wasn't a place for them to actually rest and reach the water, so they kind of slid down and drowned. I felt terrible about that, and I changed it around to where I don't use that bird bath anymore. I have one that's a little bit more flat. It's still a little bit of a depth to it, but I've got a kind of an interesting looking stone in there, or rock. I'm going to sneeze in a minute. Excuse me. I got it in the middle, and so the bees can gather on that stone and still get close enough to the water to take drinks. And they do take drinks. So that's, here we have a carpenter bee, which, you know, a lot of people don't like carpenter bees because they make holes in your house or in your deck or in your wood fence. These are a solitary bee, so it's just them. And what they do is they drill into the wood, and then they drill down, make like a tunnel in the wood, and then they lay an egg, cover that up, lay an egg, cover that up, lay an egg, cover it up, so that the tunnel is filled with eggs. There are some documents at Purdue. If you go to Google and type in Purdue Carpenter Bee, you'll get some information on the bee. It's not really considered you know, aggressive bee, and they, you know, they do serve a function. This is the mason bees that I drowned 10 of them of. This is, you'll see these mason bee houses. They've become very popular in people's backyards, but they're very common in orchards because mason bees are one of the primary bees that fertilize apple trees and other fruit trees. So, and they are, again, solitary bees, and, you know, so each one of them lives in one of those little houses. Oh, I forgot to put the name of this. This is a leafcutter bee. I love the guy who took this picture of a leafcutter bee carrying away part of his cuttings. And so this is what leafcutter bee looks like. And so what that bee was carrying was, you know, just sort of a rounded piece of plant leaf. And these are just a few examples of what the damage looks like. And this is what that leaf cutter bee was going to do with that cut leaf. And that is, they build like bee condos. And it's similar to what the carpenter bees do, you know. So the leaf cutter bee will build these little, they take the leaves and make these little condos, lay an egg, you know, fill it in, put a layer of green on there, and then, you know, lay another egg, fill it in with another layer of green. So, I mean, these are an aesthetic issue. These are not, they're not going to kill your plant. At the garden center, I remember one year we had a woman come in, and she had a redbud leaf, which is another popular plant that leafcutter bees like to make, you know, the little circles on. And she wanted something to treat the redbud tree so that the bees wouldn't do that. And I told her that, you know, they're only there for a short time, that they really don't damage the plant. It's just more of an aesthetic thing. And she, you know, was pretty insistent. And I knew that there were no chemicals approved for using bees on our shelves. So I go down what we call the, you know, the pesticide aisle, and I'm looking at all of these different cans, you know, no bees, no bees, no bees, no bees. And I told her there were no approved products for bees. And, you know, that there really wasn't anything that I could sell her for that. And she got all huffy and left. And I figured she probably went to maybe a big box store and bought it right off the shelf. But you know, it's just, these leafcutter bees are not doing anything to the plant. And so one of the reasons pollinators visit plant is for nectar. Lots of reasons they visit for nectar, especially all these different insects and birds. And then they also go for pollen. And, you know, we can think of nectar as being a nutritious supplement or, you know, that they're eating or using. Well, pollen also is nutritious. And usually what they do is they take the pollen back to the nest and use it for some construction and also to feed whatever bees are back there. But you can see the pollen on the front of, you know, or on the hind legs, I'm sorry, of this bee. They have little sacs. They would kind of look like pantaloons. And again, you can see this is where they're going to be using the pollen. Here are just a sampling of annuals that are really good for pollinators. Cosmos, you can see there a butterfly, and then below you've got two different kinds of cosmos. They definitely go there. The hummingbirds also go there. These are both native annuals, easy to grow. You can find a lot of them in garden centers and just plant them in the garden, or you can grow them from seed. Cypress vine is a favorite of hummingbirds. It's an annual vine. Start annual vines indoors because they a lot of times take a long time to bloom. So start them indoors and then plant them outside as soon as the weather permits. Lantanas, to me, are, you know, they're like a bug magnet. Hummingbirds visit them, butterflies, bees, all kinds of little teeny tiny beneficial wasps. Here we have a clear-wing moth visiting a flowering tobacco, a Nicotiana. Here's a hummer with pelargoniums. These are the annual, what we grow them as annual geraniums. And the hummingbirds really do like them. I'm going to get this right one of these days. Here we have a bee going to a sunflower, and you can see the pantaloons, like, you know, he's already got bunches of pollen on the back of his legs. And their bees are very adept at getting it. You know, some of them will crawl on the flower, and they have like stomachs that have special things and can collect the pollen as they're crawling along. Petunias, plain old petunias. Hummingbirds love petunias, and they love salvia. And, you know, we think about plants that hummers like being red. That's not necessarily true. Most animals don't see colors like we see colors. And, you know, they're attracted more to the shape of the flower. So hummingbirds like sort of trumpet-shaped flowers like this. Here's a Mexican sunflower with a monarch, another very easy to grow annual. It blooms sort of late, good strong branching characteristics, so you can even snip a few for indoor enjoyment. Zinnias are another favorite of all kinds of pollinators. We also, here you can see a crocus coming in on the, I'm sorry, the bee coming in on the crocus. You can see again the little packages of pollen on the legs. So even early blooming plants are critical when it comes to pollinators. I know a lot of people always are, you know, don't kill the dandelions because bees need them. Well, that's true, except dandelions aren't native, which is okay. But really, if we're wanting to make sure that the bees coming out of the winter have really good sustenance, look for early blooming native plants like willows and things like that. And, you know, that's where the pollinators are going to get their nutrition. This is named after Jenny. These are Virginia bluebells, and you can see the bees working his way in there. Here we have a bee on a daffodil. I mean, this is just to show you that in spring, there are a lot of bees out there, and they could be coming from hives that people have in the neighborhood, the honeybees, or the rest of them are just out there looking for food. Herbs are, there you can see a wasp on the top of that. And herbs are probably one of the better plants for pollinators. So we've already looked at dill and fennel and parsley, but borage is like, if you plant borage, you really only have to plant it once because it sort of self-sows. But the bees are all over that, and other pollinators are all over borage. It's an annual herb. tasty. Mint is another herb that bees and other pollinators just love. A lot of people are careful planting mint. They might grow it in a pot because it is a very aggressive plant. And, my story with mint is I planted it on one side of the gravel driveway at the first house I lived in, and in 2 years it had gone across the driveway and over into my neighbor's house, her side of the driveway. So it's definitely an aggressive plant. Lots of perennials that pollinators like, so we know they like yarrow. Here's an example of the milkweed. We've got the Monarch caterpillar on the right, chowing down on the butterfly, or on the milkweed plant, and then the Monarch, actually, the adult Monarch, is feeding off of the flowers. These are the columbines and coral bells are the first plants I see in spring that get hummingbirds on them. We also know about purple coneflowers and why they are so cool to have, because they also provide food in the wintertime for birds. The birds will eat the seeds out of the seed heads. So, they do self-sow a bit, but, it's not the end of the world. You can pull them out. And here we have a hummingbird on a coral bell. Here we have a clear wing moth heading for a hosta, and another bee heading for hosta. A great looking swallowtail on gay feather, honeysuckle. There are at least 3 or 4 native honeysuckles that we can grow that are fragrant and do not, fill up the woods with their vines. We don't want to plant the Japanese one, but there are, one of them is Major Wheeler, which is a red blooming one. Another one is John Clayton, which is a yellow blooming one, and they're very reliable. This one, and then also Gold Flame is another one. Dropmore Scarlet is another one. Those are hybrids, but they aren't the invasive type of honeysuckle vines that we've all heard about. Here you can see the hummingbird moth is head first into the end of a monarda. And this is one of the coolest things I've learned about pollinators. So you can see that the bee is at the part of the flower that's attached to the calyx. So the green part is the calyx, and then the flower is coming out of it. And he's really close to the calyx. And so what it's doing is it punctured a hole in the side of that flower and sucks out the nectar that way, because he's too fat to fit in the flower. So if they're too fat to fit in the flower, that's what they do. And it's called nectar robbery or nectar robbing, which I just think is so cool that they're so adept at, getting what they want. Here we have black-eyed Susans, which do self-sow like there's no tomorrow. And gold sturm is probably the most popular one out there, but there are a lot of other better ones than that that don't get fungus diseases. But again, on the right is an example of the black-eyed Susan seed heads up against a grass, and it's just a little bit of winter interest. Sedums are another plant, especially I see a lot of monarchs on sedums late in the season. New England asters, a native plant. Clear wing moth on a monarch. Now you can see on this clear wing moth, you can see something that sort of like curves out and then down into the flower, sort of a thin black line. That's its proboscis, and that's how it gets to the nectar in the flower. It's just a real long sort of a straw. And hummingbirds have that, and it's just kind of interesting how adapted they are for their job. Here we have again, well, I'm sorry, I have a repeat in here. You guys won't believe what happened to me. Oh, we're on trees and shrubs. Okay. Trees and shrubs. These are good for pollinators. So serviceberry is one of my favorite spring trees. It's slightly fragrant as it blooms. White flowers on it. It comes in a tree form or a multi-stem form. It's a native tree. It's called serviceberry because in northern states, it was bloom when the ground had thawed enough to conduct burial services. So that's one of the nicknames that it has. Another one is shadblow, which it blooms when the shad run in the river. And then Juneberry is a third name, and that's because the fruit appears in June. And the birds are going to know that that fruit is there. And if you like that fruit, I like that fruit. It tastes sort of like blueberry. The seed is a little bit bigger than a blueberry, but it's sweet. And you can make jelly out of it. I put it on yogurt. But the birds are extremely attentive to this. And if you want any of these, you need to be attentive too. Here we have butterfly bush with lots of butterflies on them. There's a criticism about this plant because it's a nectar producing plant, but it's not a food source plant. And in some parts of the country, this is an invasive species. Most of the ones on the market today are sterile. So they do have nectar, but there's no pollen and there's no seed setting for the butterfly bush to, spread that way. The Nature Conservancy monitors plants in our state to kind of detect their invasiveness. And even though people in Indiana talk about this being invasive, it's not on any list. But like I said, the newer ones are sterile and generally, not anything to really worry about. This is one of my favorite plants for late season. This is a Caryopteris. It's also called a blue mist spirea, but it's not a spirea at all. It's an aromatic plant. The flowers and the foliage have a kind of a clean aromatic look, smell to them. And this is loaded with bees and butterflies at the end of the season. And it's that gorgeous color. And it's very easy to grow. It's a dieback to the ground plant. I leave it upright through winter, and then in spring, just whack it back. This is a button bush, which is another native shrub. It is a very big shrub. It's like 8 to 10 feet tall and wide, which is why I always lusted after one, but never had one in my garden because that would be the backyard. But so proven winners and first edition plants have introduced smaller varieties of buttonbush. Proven winners is, Sugar Shack, and the first editions is Fiber Optic. I've grown both of them. They both have a really good form. They both attract the pollinators, bees, and other kinds of insects. Those are the flowers, the little balls of the flowers that you see there, and they take on a fall color. And the new ones are in the 4 to 5 foot tall and wide range, which is a lot easier to work in most people's yard. The cool thing about buttonbush is it does really well in wet areas, or areas where the soil stays most, and it also does fine in regular garden beds like mine. I don't have a wet area where I put it. Winterberry Holly, a favorite of mine, really. I don't have the right landscape environment for this. It's a native plant. They were really brought into the trade by a company in Vincennes, Indiana, Simpson Nursery. They started hybridizing them and bringing them to market. It's like any holly, and you need a male and a female holly plant in order to have good fruit production. There are some that are sort of being bred together, or I don't think they're, actually, where there's a root ball and the stem. I don't think they're like that, but they are maybe grown in the same pot together so that you have the male and the female. I think that caterpillar is so cool. This is a spice bush. That's the spice bush caterpillar. This is the spice bush swallowtail caterpillar. And then these are spice bush fruits, which are kind of good. I've eaten them. And you can make snickerdoodles out of them. And I've provided you with the recipe from my friend Ellen Zakos, who's a forager. And so she makes these spice bush snickerdoodles, and you can find that on my website at that link. Crab apples are another plant that really attract bees, and they also feed the birds in the wintertime. A dwarf Alberta spruce is a really great plant for, I call it a bird condo. This is in my yard, and in the wintertime, that tree is stuffed with birds. Off to the left is where the bird feeders are. And so they all sit there and chit chat, and then, you know, bop over to the bird feeder and back, and what kind of seed did they have there today, kind of thing, you know. This is also a native viburnum nudum. This cultivar is called Brandywine. And these are the colors of that plant. I mean, literally, it just takes my breath away in the fall. On the right, you can see the blue fruit that forms on the plant. The flower is, hey, it does have a flower, but it's a flat lace cap flower, and it looks okay, you know, but to me, this is the reason to have this plant. The color is just so intense, and like I say, it just really takes my breath away. This is a Winter King Hawthorne. This also, Winter King was introduced again by Simpson Nursery down in Vincennes, which has been around 100 and some years. And this is a good plant for urban settings. A lot of the arborists call it a guns and bullet tree because it's a tough plant for urban areas. It has white flowers in spring, and I actually think some of them might be blooming now. I have a hard time making sure that that's exactly what it is. Green leaves in the summertime, and then in winter, it's just loaded with this red fruit. And as the tree ages, the bark on the tree starts to flake off, and then it's really cinnamony looking on the inside. This is not a huge tree, and so again, it's great for backyards. One of the best sightings I saw was when I worked at the Indianapolis Star downtown, and we were across the street on New York Street from Indiana National, I don't know, whatever it is now, Regions, is that what it is? And they had, all their parking lot was lined with these hawthorns, and in the wintertime, it was just spectacular looking at them. But if you only had to plant one tree in your garden to support wildlife, this would be the one, the white oak. The white oak, Doug Tallamy, who has written several books about native plants on bringing nature home. He's, you know, studied this. He's a professor at the University of Delaware. He's a frequent speaker in Indiana. I told him he was an honorary Hoosier. He's been here so many times. But the white oak supports more than 400 different species of caterpillars. And you think, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have any leaves left on the tree if that has 400 and some caterpillars on it. But the birds eat the caterpillars on the tree. And so it's one plant that actually supports a lot of different plants as we move along. That's the end. You can see down there in your handout that there's a way you can sign up for my monthly newsletter. You can email me there. And, you know, if you like this talk and would like to write a review, you can go to greatgardenspeakers.com and write a review. And if you were unhappy, just email me privately. You know, I'm available for other talks and other kinds of programming. So I'm really glad that you were here today, and we can answer any questions.
All right, so if anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat. Those were just fantastic photographs. It's so, really just paints the picture well.
I know. You know, I told Cliff Sadoff up at Purdue, he's an entomology extension agent up at Purdue. He's my bug guy. He's been my bug guy for 20 years. And he and the late Bob O'Neill, another entomology professor at Purdue, spoke at my Master Gardener class. It was Steve's second class. And Cliff and Bob came down and spoke to the group about insects. And I've told Cliff that it completely changed my attitude about insects. You know, how hard their life is. And, you know, it's prey or predator, you know, and I've learned to offer a lot of respect for them. I'm still not crazy about the crunchy ones, but, you know, I do appreciate what they are, and I'm not quick to kill insects. So I try to carry them outside if I can.
All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I will close it down for today. So thank you all for attending. Oh, wait, we got a question. Let's see, I came in late, but oops, now they're going.
So bringing caterpillars to raise?
But what are your thoughts on bringing in caterpillars to raise? I've done this for years now with swallowtails and monarchs. There's been tons of mixed information online.
Yeah, I've read that. That's sort of newer information about whether that really is helping anything. You know, whether you're really contributing to the population of monarchs or swallowtails. And, you know, I'm not a scientist. I just sort of play one. And I don't really have an answer for that. I think a lot of it depends on the attitude that you have. You know, it's citizen science. It's a way that you can experience nature and the wonders of nature, how you can teach your children about that, how you can, you know, work with the kids in the neighborhood, or, you know, something like that. And so if that's what your goal is, you're meeting that goal. And, you know, if one of the monarchs that you raise, you know, makes it down to Mexico, more power to you. But I think it would take, you know, millions of people to do this in order to have a true impact on the numbers. So I definitely think that if you're interested in doing it and you like doing it, keep doing it. It's not hurting anything. And, you know, it's, they've got like less than a 50% chance of survival, you know, just in nature alone. So.
Oh, wow. She said she's released close to 100 monarchs and swallowtails last year.
I think that's great.
Good
you
job.
know. Yeah, but I think again, it's the, you know, the attitude, the fact that you're taking part in science, you know, up close and with nature, and you know, it's a great thing to do. There's nothing wrong with doing it.
I've had the wonderful benefit. The most recent house we purchased was previously owned by a master gardener who she just planted a beautiful array of plants, and we're not familiar with all of them, but every season is amazing, and every year we sort of send off thank yous because it's just beautiful, and I can tell that she really knew what she was doing and that she was very purposeful about making sure that there was pollinator-friendly plants all year round. And it's been really delightful to watch. So it's really fun to have the lesson to explain it now.
One thing to keep in mind is, and that is when you're really wanting a pollinator garden, you know, there's sort of natural flyways in nature. And so, you know, ideally you plant the same plants in this, you know, the same section. So you'd have like maybe 5 coneflowers, 5 salvias. You don't have to do onesies because first of all, it saves labor on the bees, bee labor. Honeybees in particular practice you know, plant fidelity. So the honeybees come out of their hives and they're only going to visit lavender. Then they go back and, you know, deposit all the lavender. And then they come out and they may be only visiting salvias. They're not like butterflies, flitting from different plant to different plant. They're, you know, focused on a certain kind of plant. They can change that plant, but they don't flit from flower to flower. So that's another reason to sort of plant your pollinator plants, you know, together. And then even more exciting would be to get your neighbors to do it, and then to get their neighbors to do it, and to get maybe the whole subdivision to do it, or the whole block. And then, you know, you've really got an environment and a habitat that's going to attract and support the pollinators that we all want.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Any suggestions on how to plant annuals and perennials for a full year to feed and have color, trying to work and fill a whole yard, new construction, blank canvas?
That's a pretty big question. So I would say go ahead and start with, go to the Indiana Native Plant Society. They have a lot of different plant lists there for the various seasons, annuals and perennials, and, you know, kind of get a sense of how that works. That would be what I would do, because, you know, that and work on my soil, those would be the two things that I would do. You know, it's just going to take time. So I think, you know, educating yourself on that, or hiring somebody to, you know, to help you with that project. And then, are native pollinator friendly plants more important than the cultivated ones? There is a lot of information out there on that. And it kind of comes up, you know, with the butterfly bush, which is not a native plant, and it doesn't provide food, but it provides nectar. I would say that the ecologists are going to tell us that yes, native plants are preferred over non-native plants. But if it's a cultivated one, I wouldn't necessarily throw it out, because I'm not a native plant purist. There are a lot of native plants that we don't want in our gardens. They're, you know, a 6-foot tall solid Canadian solidago with, you know, downy mildew whipping around in the yard is not my idea of a garden worthy plant. So there are a lot of native plants that I would consider not garden worthy. You know, but mixing them together is fine. I think, you know, I'm too much of a plant lover to say, oh, you can't have that plant, you know, but I would say whatever works for you works.
I dropped the link for the Indiana Native Plant Society in the chat box, and we would like to thank all of you for attending. We will edit the video and send it to all who registered for this class, along with some information about Joellen and Bethany Community Gardens. At Bethany Community Gardens, new volunteers are always welcome. We get together every Tuesday evening from late April to mid-October. Tuesday evening anytime between 5 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. Your next opportunity to join us is on Tuesday after Mother's Day, May 11th. We will be planting warm season crops. This is a great way to gain hands-on gardening experience. Just stop by anytime after 5 p.m. and sign in at the table. Bethany Community Gardens is located at 4702 Southeast Street on the south side of Indianapolis. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.